knew very well that we would go back if we could. Finally we began to get the hang of it, and we did go back, although by circuitous routes. But we got there, and the moniteur explained again what we were to do. We were to anticipate the turn of the machine with the rudder, just as in sailing a boat. Then we understood the difficulty. In my next sortie, I fixed my eye upon the flag at the opposite side of the field, and reached it without a single cheval de bois. I could have kissed the Annamite who was stationed there to turn the machines, which rarely came. I had mastered the Penguin. I had forced my will upon it, compelled it to do my bidding. Back across the field I went, keeping a direct course and thinking how they were all watching. The moniteur, doubtless, making approving comments. I reduced the gas at the proper time and taxied triumphantly to the starting point. But no one had seen my splendid sortie. Now that I had arrived, no one paid the least attention to me. All eyes were turned upward, and following them with my own, I saw an airplane outlined against a heaped-up pile of snow-white cloud. It was moving at tremendous speed, when suddenly it darted straight upward, wavered for a second or two, then turned slowly on one wing and fell nose down, turning round and round as it fell, like a scrap of paper. It was the Vril, the prettiest piece of aerial acrobatics that one could wish to see. It was wonderful, an incredible sight. Only 7 years ago Blériot crossed the English Channel, and a year earlier the world was astonished at the exploits of the Wright brothers, who were making flights, straight-line flights, of from 15 to 20 minutes' duration. Someone was counting the turns of the Vril: 6, 7, 8. Then the airman came out of it on an even keel, and, nosing down to gather speed, looped twice in quick succession. Afterward he did a retournement, turning completely over in the air, and going back in the opposite direction, then spiraled down and passed over our heads at about 50 metres, landing at the opposite side of the field so beautifully that it was impossible to know when the machine touched the ground. The airman taxied back to the hangars and stopped just in front of us, while we gathered round to hear the latest news from the front. For he had left the front, this birdman, only an hour before. I was incredulous at first, for I still thought of distances in the old way, but I was soon convinced. Mounted on the hood was the competent-looking Vickers machine-gun, with a long belt of cartridges in place, and on the side of the fuselage was painted the insignia of a escadrille. The pilot was recognized as soon as he removed his helmet and goggles. He had been a moniteur at the school in former days, and was well known to some of the older Americans. He greeted us all very cordially in excellent English, and told us how, on the strength of a hard morning's work over the lines, he had asked his captain for an afternoon off, that he might visit his old friends at B. As soon as he had climbed down, those of us who had never before seen the latest type of French avion de chasse crowded around, examining and admiring with feelings of awe and reverence. It was a marvelous piece of aerial craftsmanship, the result of more than 2 years of accumulating experience in military aviation. It was hard to think of this as an inanimate thing. Once having seen it in the air, it seemed living, intelligent, almost human. I could readily understand how it is that airmen become attached to their machines, and speak of their fine points, their little peculiarities of individuality, with a kind of loving interest, as one might speak of a fine-spirited horse. While the mechanicians were grooming this one and replenishing the fuel tanks, Drew and I examined it line by line, talking in low tones which seemed fitting in so splendid a presence. We climbed the step and looked down into the compact little car, where the pilot sat in a luxuriously upholstered seat. There were his compasses, his altimeter, his revolution counter, his map in its roller case, with a course pricked out on it in a red line. Attached to the machine-gun there was an ingenious contrivance by which he fired it while still keeping a steady hand on his controls. The gun itself was fired directly through the propeller by means of a device which timed the shots. The necessity for accuracy in this timing device is clear when one remembers that the propeller turns over at a normal rate of between 1,500 and 1,900 revolutions per minute. It was with a chastened spirit that I looked from this splendid fighting plane back to my little three-cylinder Penguin, with its absurd clipped wings and its impudent tail. A moment ago it had seemed a thing of speed, and the mastery of its glorious achievement. I told Drew what my feeling was when I came racing back to the starting line, and how brief my moment of triumph had been. He answered me at first in grunts and nods, so that I knew he was not listening. Presently he began to talk about romance again, the romance of high adventure, as he called it. All this, moving his arm in a wide gesture, was but an evidence of man's unconquerable craving for romance. War itself was a manifestation of it, gave it scope, relieved the pent-up longings for which it could not find sufficient outlet in times of peace. Romance would always be one of the minor, and sometimes one of the major causes for war. Indirectly, of course, but none the less really. For the craving for it was one reason why millions of men so readily accepted war at the hands of the little groups of diplomats who ruled their destinies. Half an hour later, as we stood watching the little biplane again climbing into the evening sky, I understood in a way what he was driving at, and with what keen anticipation he was looking forward to the time when he too would know all that there was to know of the joy of flight. Higher and higher it mounted, now and then catching the sun on its silver wings in a flash of light, growing smaller and smaller until it vanished in a golden haze far to the north. It was then 4 o'clock. In an hour's time the pilot would be circling down over his aerodrome on the Champagne front. Chapter 2